Let's talk about pressure. At sea level, you have 14.7 pounds per square inch pressing on your skin. It's negligible. You don't even feel it.
But drop down to 12,500 feet where the Titanic rests, and the math changes violently. The stakes go from 0 to absolute zero chance of survival.
At that depth, the water column exerts roughly 6,000 psi. Picture an African elephant balancing on a single postage stamp. Now cover your entire body in those stamps.
To experience that physics lesson, 5 people signed a waiver. It mentioned death 3 times on the first page alone. The price tag, $250,000 per seat.
They were descending in the Titan. It was an experimental submersible. An experimental in deep-sea engineering usually means deadly.
It was a business experiment too. OceanGate was trying to disrupt the industry. They bypassed standard certification. They claimed safety regulations stifled innovation.
Physics doesn't care about innovation. The hull was a carbon fiber cylinder with titanium end caps. That is a structural nightmare.
Carbon fiber is great for airplanes. Ideally, it holds pressure in. It is not designed to hold high pressure out.
Exactly. Under compression, carbon fiber doesn't bend. It shatters. And mixing it with titanium, you have 2 materials that react differently to temperature and stress.
They glued them together, literally, a specialized adhesive. But in the cold, dark, materials shrink at different rates. The glue didn't stand a chance. Over time,
we call that cyclic fatigue. Every time that sub went down and came up, microscopic cracks were forming in the resin. The hull was getting softer with every dive.
And they knew it, or at least they were warned. Years prior, their director of marine operations, David Lockridge, raised the red flag.
He explicitly stated the carbon fiber hull would fail after repeated cycles. He asked for non-destructive testing. He wanted to scan the hull for flaws.
Instead of listening, OceanGate fired him. They sued him for breach of contract. They prioritized the launch schedule over the structural integrity.
They relied on an acoustic monitoring system. Basically, microphones glued to the hull to listen for cracking sounds.
Think about the logic there. The warning system only activates when the hull starts to tear apart. It gives you milliseconds of notice.
It's not an alarm. It's an autopsy report in real time. By the time you hear the crack at 3,800 meters, you are already biology paced.
So, on June 18th, they dive. Communication is lost 1 hour and 45 minutes into the descent, just above the Titanic wreckage.
At that exact moment, the hoop stress on the cylinder exceeded the strength of the carbon fibers. The failure wasn't a leak, it was a total structural collapse.
The US Navy detected an anomaly on their acoustic sensors, a sound consistent with an implosion or explosion. They knew immediately.
But the world waited 4 days. We talked about oxygen reserves. We talked about banging sounds, but the physics dictated they were gone before the comms cut out.
Let's break down the speed. This is the part that haunts people. How fast does 6,000 psi crush a carbon fiber tube?
The collapse velocity of the water walls moving inward was roughly 1,500 miles per hour. The entire sub crumpled in less than 1 millisecond.
For context, the human brain takes about 13 milliseconds to process an image. It takes even longer to register pain.
They literally ceased to exist before their brains could realize the hull had breached. The air inside the sub didn't just compress, it auto-ignited.
Adiabatic compression. The gas heats up instantly when crushed. That fast, the temperature inside that bubble momentarily rivaled the surface of the sun.
It was a diesel engine piston effect, but on a human scale, incineration and crushing happened simultaneously.
And yet, the media focus was on the logic controller used to steer the ship. People mocked the gaming tech.
The controller was actually the least of their problems. The military uses Xbox controllers for drones. That works. The problem was the hull geometry.
Most deep-sea subs are spheres. A sphere distributes pressure perfectly evenly. The Titan was a cylinder.
A cylinder allows you to pack in more paying customers. It's good for revenue, bad for survival. The pressure focuses on the middle of the tube.
They sacrificed the perfect geometric shape for a shape that could fit 2 extra seats at $250,000 a pop.
That decision turned the hull into a ticking time bomb. It wasn't a matter of if it would fail. It was strictly a matter of when.
And on that Sunday morning, the when finally arrived. The Ocean collected its debt.
The energy release was equivalent to detonating 110 pounds of TNT down there. Violent physics is the only law that matters.
No lawyers, no waivers, and no CEO charisma can negotiate with 400 atmospheres of pressure.
So we have a vessel designed to fail, piloted by a man who believed he was above the rules of engineering.
And 4 passengers who trusted a company that bought its carbon fiber from expired aircraft stock.
Wait, expired stock? You mean they didn't even use aerospace-grade fresh material?
Boeing reportedly refused to sell the material for the hull. OceanGate sourced carbon fiber that was past its shelf life to save on raw material costs.
That is suicidal. Carbon fiber resin has an expiration date. If it cures improperly, you get voids. Voids mean weakness.
It was a discount tomb, a high-tech coffin sold as an adventure tourism experience.
And the worst part? The physics of the implosion left nothing behind. Just debris on the seafloor.
We need to dissect exactly how the collapse happened, step by step, from the first crack to the final silence.
Agreed. Let's look at the mechanics of the failure, because the hull didn't just break, it unzipped. To understand why the Titan failed, you have to look at the microscopic structure of the hull itself. Carbon fiber is a composite material, made by winding strands of fiber coated in resin around a cylinder. Ideally, this creates a solid, unified piece. But in reality, the manufacturing process often leaves tiny, microscopic air bubbles or voids between the layers. At surface pressure, these voids are meaningless, but at 3,800 meters down, the ocean is actively trying to push water into those gaps with the force of a hydraulic press, causing the layers to separate from the inside out, a process we call delamination.
And the origin of that material is where the negligence becomes criminal. OceanGate didn't source fresh, aerospace-grade carbon fiber designed for high-stress environments. Reports indicate they bought expired stock that had been rejected for use in Boeing aircraft. Stockton Rush, the CEO, effectively purchased scrap material at a discount, operating under the arrogant belief that the safety margins required for flying airplanes were overkill for deep-sea submersibles. He was building a vessel to go into the most hostile environment on Earth using bargain bin components that were already past their shelf life.
That degradation was compounded by the shape of the hull. Deep-sea physics demands a sphere, because a sphere distributes external pressure perfectly evenly across the entire surface. By choosing a cylinder, a pill shape, OceanGate created a structure where the stress was focused heavily on the center of the tube, exactly where the carbon fiber was weakest. Every time they dove, the immense pressure compressed the hull, and when they surfaced, it expanded back out. This cycle of compression and expansion caused the brittle carbon fibers to crack progressively over time, making the hull weaker with every single trip.
This is why standard classification societies, like Lloyd's Register or DNV, refuse to certify the Titan. Certification requires rigorous, destructive testing, where you basically torture a hull until it breaks to know its true limits. But Stockton Rush refused to pay for that or wait for the results. He claimed that regulation was an obstacle to innovation, famously writing in emails that he was tired of industry players trying to use a safety argument to stop innovation. He bypassed the entire regulatory system by operating in international waters where no single government had clear jurisdiction to stop him.
He tried to replace that certification with his proprietary real-time acoustic monitoring system. The idea was that sensors attached to the hull would listen for the sound of carbon fibers snapping and alert the pilot to ascend. But this relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of brittle fracture mechanics. By the time you hear the fibers snapping loudly enough to trigger an alarm at that depth, the structural integrity is already compromised beyond repair. You aren't getting an early warning. You are hearing the sound of the gun being fired at your head.
There was also a critical failure point right in front of their faces: the viewport. The acrylic window at the front of the sub was only certified by the manufacturer to a depth of 1,300 meters. They were taking it to nearly 4,000 meters. The manufacturer explicitly refused to certify it for the Titanic's depth, warning that it would crack or fail. But OceanGate ignored the data. They simply refused to pay for a window rated for the correct depth, likely because a custom viewport of that thickness and optical clarity would have cost tens of thousands of dollars more and delayed the launch schedule.
If we reconstruct the final moments based on the physics of the debris field, it's likely the failure started near the interface between the titanium rings and the carbon fiber tube. These two materials compress at different rates, creating shear stress at the glue joint. As the sub descended past 3,000 meters, the hull likely began to groan and crackle audibly, a terrifying sound that previous passengers had reported. The passengers likely knew something was wrong in those final seconds. They dropped their ballast weights, which is the emergency protocol to gain buoyancy. But the physics of the collapse was faster than their ability to ascend.
And let's look at the crew designation loophole they used to get people on board. To avoid U.S. regulations regarding passengers, OceanGate called their paying customers missions specialists. They weren't buying a ticket. They were contributing funding to a scientific expedition. This legal gymnastics was designed to strip away consumer protections and shield the company from liability. They convinced wealthy tourists that they were part of the crew, effectively making them complicit in their own lack of safety, all while charging them $250,000 to be test subjects in an uncertified experiment.
When the collapse finally happened, it wasn't a slow leak or a gradual crush. It was a violent, supersonic event. The pressure differential was so massive that the air inside the sub, along with the diesel fuel effect of the compression, created an explosion and an implosion simultaneously. The carbon fiber didn't just break, it shredded into filaments, turning the hull into a cloud of debris rather than a broken vessel. The titanium end caps, being stronger, survived relatively intact, but everything in the middle, the cylinder where the people were sitting, was simply erased from existence in a fraction of a second.
This wasn't a tragedy of unknown variables. It was a tragedy of ignored spreadsheets. Every single warning sign, from the firing of their safety director David Lockridge to the letters from the Marine Technology Society, was deliberately pushed aside to protect the business model. They were selling the romance of the Titanic, but the logistics of the operation were held together by zip ties, off-the-shelf electronics, and a refusal to acknowledge that the ocean always collects on its debts. They saved money on the hull, on the testing, and on the viewport. But the final cost was total liquidation. The search operation that followed was a massive display of international resources, and ironically, it cost far more than the company ever invested in safety. For 4 days, the U.S. Coast Guard, Canadian Navy, and commercial vessels scoured a surface area twice the size of Connecticut, burning through an estimated $1.2 million to $1.5 million per day. Taxpayers from multiple nations footed the bill for a rescue mission that was in reality a recovery mission from the very first millisecond. While the world held its breath hoping for a miracle, the financial reality is that we were burning millions of dollars, chasing ghosts in the deep.
The discovery of the debris field by the Horizon Arctic's ROV put a brutal end to the hope. They found the tail cone of the Titan about 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic, lying on the ocean floor like discarded trash. Crucially, the debris was consistent with a catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. The titanium end caps were found separated from the rest of the ship, and the carbon fiber cylinder was virtually disintegrated. It verified that the bond between the glue, the titanium, and the carbon fiber had failed completely, ejecting the structural components outward while the ocean rushed inward.
This disaster effectively ended OceanGate as a company, but the legal shockwaves are just beginning. They suspended all exploration and commercial operations immediately, but the lawsuits will likely drag on for a decade. While the passengers signed waivers that explicitly mentioned death, legal experts argue that you cannot sign away gross negligence if the families can prove that Stockton Rush knew the hull was flawed. Based on the warnings from Lockridge and the expired materials, those waivers might be worthless in court. We are looking at potential wrongful death suits that could exceed hundreds of millions of dollars, piercing the corporate veil straight to the estate of the CEO.
From a biological standpoint, there is nothing to recover for the families, and that is the hardest truth to accept. At that depth and that speed, the implosion acts like a high-tech crematorium. The bodies were subjected to forces that fragmented them at a cellular level before being scattered into the current. The presumed human remains the Coast Guard mentioned recovering were likely microscopic or fused with the wreckage. It is a permanent burial at sea, enforced by the laws of physics. The ocean reclaimed the biological matter as efficiently as it crushed the carbon fiber.
The ripple effect has frozen the high-end adventure tourism industry. This was the Icarus moment for the billionaire explorer class. For years, wealthy individuals assumed that if you paid enough money, safety was guaranteed, regardless of the experimental nature of the vehicle. Now, insurance premiums for these types of expeditions are skyrocketing to the point of unviability. We are going to see a massive regulatory clampdown. The Wild West era of private citizens building submarines in warehouses and diving into international waters to bypass the Coast Guard is over.
The engineering verdict is absolute. Composite materials like carbon fiber have no place in deep-sea pressure hulls that undergo cyclic stress. We have used titanium and steel for decades because they deform plastically. They warn you before they break. Carbon fiber is brittle. It offers zero warning. The Titan proved that you cannot hack the ocean with unproven materials just to save weight or money. Innovation is necessary, but when you ignore the foundational rules of material science, you aren't an innovator. You're just a casualty waiting to happen.
And the financial verdict is just as cold. OceanGate tried to run a deep-sea exploration company, like a tech startup, move fast and break things. But when you break things at 400 atmospheres of pressure, you don't get a software patch. You get a funeral. This serves as a grim reminder that no amount of marketing spin or CEO charisma can negotiate with the bottom line of survival. If the logistics don't add up and the safety budget is slashed to protect the profit margin, the cost is eventually paid in blood.
So if you are ever offered a seat on an experimental vessel, ask the hard questions. Ask about the materials, ask about the certification, and ask about the testing cycles. If the answer is, we don't need certification because we are too innovative, walk away. The ocean is the most hostile environment on this planet. It is dark, it is cold, and it is endlessly patient. It waits for a single mistake, a single crack, a single moment of arrogance. Don't give it one.
Check the credentials. Follow the money. If the company is cutting corners on the hull, they are gambling with your life.
Respect the physics, stay sharp,